please start.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to present my observations as a bovine practitioner in the UK from things we see in the field. So just in case you don't know where England is, it's in Western Europe, and this is a picture of England, and this is where my practice is. And just for the purposes of Dick, later on, he's down here. So my practice is in South Somerset, pretty famous for its apples, its cider, and its alcoholic effects. Cheddar Gorge, which lends its name to the vast majority of the milk that produces cheddar cheese, which is what goes on in at least 2 factories in and around our area. And most of our dairies supply these 2 factories. And that's the famous Glastonbury tour. And just to the right here is where Glastonbury Festival is held, which some of you may have heard of, big music festival. And this is our practice in, oh, sorry. How do you go back? Up. So this is our practice in the little market town of Castle Carey. Thank you. We're a practice of 9 vets, 7 clinical, 2 TB vets, and we look after 21,000 dairy cows and about 20,000 young stock, predominantly dairy. And most of our herds are endemically infected with BVD, IBR, and leptospirosis. So these 2 herds are under the same ownership. Herd H is actually a Holstein, pedigree Holstein herd, and herd J is a pedigree Jersey herd, and they're quite rare in our area because they were very high health status and disease-free, or at least certainly were until 2011, 2012 winter, when we saw an incursion of leptospirosis, typically presenting as milk drop. And the interesting thing also, as we'll follow, is that all the young stock are reared together from the 2 herds from about 7 days of age until 3 weeks prior to their first calving. And consequently, because we're in such an endemically infected area, we do regular screening for all the common infectious diseases, including 6-monthly bulk milk tank antibody ELISA tests and cohort screening of young stock at 9 to 12 months of age, coinciding with the annual TB test. And we were tickling along quite nicely with bulk tank milk ELISA negative results, including in October 2014 and February 2015, they were both negative. This is for herd H. And in the previous summer at the TB test, the young stock screen was negative for BVD, and then suddenly we turned up an interesting finding at our regular screening of all abortions or reabsorptions. So on the 27th of January 2015, a routine investigation of a first lactation heifer aborting at 218 days of gestation was negative for all the common things, but turned up a positive ELISA test to BVD, which started ringing alarm bells. The bulk tank milk ELISA, as previously shown, was negative. We did a PCR test for virus and it was negative. So at least on that particular day, there was no evidence of a PI or a TI animal contributing milk to the bulk tank. And so on the basis of this, knowing that we had naive herd, we decided in conjunction with the owner that we would just vaccinate herd H, but all animals in the young stock program. So that was herd H and herd J young stock. And this was using a double deleted modified live vaccine. Herd J, we upped the surveillance from every 6 months to 4 months. So negative in the routine one in October, did one again in February, which was about the time we were identifying seemed that BVD was coming into the sister herd. We had a low positive, very low positive in June, and was negative in October 2015. So this is sort of 9 months after the abortion in herd H. And then in August, September 2015, we had 8 reabsorptions, and the reabsorption definition in our practice is those animals that are ultrasound PD positive between 28 and 42 days post-AI and have a return to estrus, a visible estrus, more than 70 days after this service. And again, this PD negative was confirmed by ultrasound. And actually looking at the gestational range, it was between 70 and 130 days after the AI for all 8 reabsorptions. 6 were screened for ELISA for Neospora and BVD. So we're into October 2015, and we turned up 1 positive Neospora and 1 positive BVD. And so as a result of that, we then went on to do PCR test on herd J. Previous slide shows that the bulk tank ELISA is still negative at this point after being a low positive in June. The PCR came back negative. And so then the rest of the milking and dry portion of herd J were vaccinated. So that's what we did. And then for the purposes after that of trying to analyse any effects on reproduction, I borrowed the model from Howe et al. In 1993, who had looked at the reproductive performance of herds, comparing periods when these were naive herds previously, working backwards from when PI animals were conceived and born and comparing it to periods of when the vast majority of the herd was seroconverted. So for this purpose, we had a risk period, which was the 8 months prior to vaccination. These are the dates for herd H, slightly different to herd J, and so a bit later on in the time frame. And the overall conception rate, no difference at all in herd H, but approaching significance by the Fisher's exact test in herd J. And the thinking there was borrowing from the work of Whitehead and others back in the mid-90s, is that actually in herd H, we were much further down the timeline of incursion of BVD, so far more animals in the adult herd had seroconverted compared to the timeline in herd J. Horrible slide, might wake 1 or 2 people up. Risk period, post-vaccination period, this is for herd H, going along, absolutely no difference. This is just breaking it down by conception rate by the month of service. But in herd J, we did see quite a rise from in July. As always in the field, there was a change in AI technician in July 2015. But in the 3 months prior to vaccination, around the time we think BVD was having its effects on the reabsorptions, there was a reduction. But after vaccination, an improvement, certainly in the first 3 months. Breaking it down by lactation number and service number, herd H, not surprisingly, very little effect on either. But herd J, quite a difference in terms of both all services and particularly multiparous cows compared to the uniparous cows, which were pretty much identical. So these, again, when you split these down into multiparous, comparing before and after, that was approaching significance by the Fisher's exact test. And we mentioned the reasons before with the timeline. However, we mustn't forget the confounding factor of the change in AI technician. Because we know from many studies that follicular genesis, steroidogenesis, and behavioural estrus is affected by BVD virus, we looked at a return to service interval analysis before and after, absolutely no effect in herd H, but quite a difference in the 18 to 25 day interval return to service before and after. But again, we have the confounding factor that the fact that the AI technician was also the guy doing the heat detection, so there was this change, and it might confuse things. So looking at abortions, and this is defined by the product, the herdsman actually seeing a calf being produced. Before vaccination, there was 1 in herd H and 3 in the post-vaccination period, all 3 occurring within the first 6 weeks after vaccination, and 2 were Neospora antibody positive. Herd J, there were no abortions before or after. Reabsorptions, remembering the definition I've already given you. There were 7 in the risk period in 199 susceptible animals in herd H, but only 1 in 209. There's more animals coming into the herd in that time frame. And this was significantly different at the 5% level. Herd J, 11 in the risk period, 8 of which we've already mentioned in this period, August-September 2015, but only 1 in the post-vaccination period, and significantly different at the 1% level. So, 3 findings, really. The bulk tank milk ELISA may have its limitations in the early stages of an incursion of BVD virus into a BVD naive herd. And indeed, Fodai and his co-workers in 2014 had concluded that not only did the type of ELISA affect the detection time from BVD virus introduction, but also the route of incursion, the persistently infected animal route being far more shorter than the transiently infected route. BVD virus incursion was first detected in these 2 herds by individual blood sampling of cases of abortion or reabsorption, but this does rely on diligence of the herdsman and the stockman picking these things up. And that there was a significant, statistically significant difference in the reabsorption rate after using this double-deleted live vaccine. Not previously mentioned in the literature, though, obviously, there are many papers, including our chairman's paper in 1990, that associated embryo-fetal death with BVD virus infection coming into non-immune herds. So the conclusions I have from this study is that actually routine screening after detection, good detection of reabsorption and abortions, may be more useful in detecting BVD virus incursion into a naive herd rather than relying on the appearance of antibodies in bulk tank milk. And additionally, the use of double-deleted modified live vaccine may protect or indeed improve conception rates, particularly in multiparous cows in the face of an incursion, but also it may protect and or reduce the number of reabsorptions of confirmed pregnancies in such herds. I'd like to acknowledge particularly Matt Yarnell and Christian at Boehringer and all the staff and the owners of Farms H&J, and of course my colleagues in Castle Kerry. Thank you very much.
So, thank you, Mike.